When I was a kid, my grandma, Evelyn Carter, was more than just a grandmother to me. She was the person I looked up to most in the world. She had this warm, gentle way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. People in our small Oregon town adored her. She ran the little bakery on Main Street, the one with the blue shutters and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifting out every morning. Every customer who walked through the door left with not only a box of something sweet but also a smile. To me, she was magic. I spent almost every weekend at her house, an old, creaky white two-story with a porch swing that never stopped swaying, even when there was no wind. She taught me how to sew buttons back onto shirts, how to make blueberry pie from scratch, and how to plant marigolds so they'd bloom just right in spring. She had these big, soft hands that always smelled faintly of vanilla and lavender. But the thing that stuck with me most was how she always told me, "Family is everything, sweetheart. Never forget that." That phrase became almost like a family motto. It was something she said to me, my mom, and even strangers when she was feeling extra sentimental. And everyone believed it, especially me. My mom, on the other hand, didn't have the same sunshine and roses relationship with grandma that I did. Mom was grateful for her, sure, but there was this distance. I noticed it even when I was little. Sometimes, grandma would tell me stories about when my mom was a kid, laughing about how stubborn she was, and mom would just smile politely and change the subject. I never thought much of it, after all. Not everyone gets along perfectly with their parents. It wasn't until years later that I realized the truth behind those polite smiles. When I was 19, everything changed. It was the summer after my first year of college, and I come back to town to work at a coffee shop and save money for textbooks. Grandma had been getting weaker over the past year. She'd brush it off, saying things like, "Oh, it's just age catching up to me," or "I'm fine, don't fuss." But this time, I could tell something was different. She moved slower, her hands shook when she poured tea, and she spent more time in her armchair, staring out the window. One afternoon in late July, Mom called me while I was at work. Her voice cracked before she even said the words. "It's Grandma. She's gone." I froze. The coffee cup in my hand slipped and shattered on the counter. The funeral was everything you'd expect in a small town. Neighbors bringing casseroles, old church ladies crying into lace handkerchiefs, and people standing up to share stories about how Grandma had been there for them in hard times. One man said she'd paid his rent when he was about to lose his house. Another woman swore Grandma had helped her hide from an abusive boyfriend. Every story made me proud, but also empty. I couldn't believe she was gone. After the service, Mom told me we'd need to help clean out Grandma's house. She wanted it done quickly, saying it would be easier that way. We spent days sorting through decades of memories. The attic was full of old Christmas decorations, boxes of recipes, and jars of buttons she'd been saving just in case. In the bedroom, we found stacks of photo albums filled with pictures of birthday parties, graduations, and random Tuesday afternoons where nothing in particular happened, just family being together. Then, in her sewing room, tucked behind an old basket of fabric scraps, I found it. Grandma's sewing box. It was wooden, with a faded floral design on the lid and a tiny brass latch that had lost most of its shine. I recognized it instantly. This was where she kept her needles, thread, and little sewing trinkets. I almost didn't open it. Part of me felt like it was sacred, like it should be left untouched. But I did. At first, it was just the usual: spools of thread, buttons, a thimble. Then, at the very bottom, under a false wooden panel I didn't even know was there, I found a small bundle of envelopes tied together with a blue ribbon. They were old, the paper yellowed and soft at the edges. On the top envelope, written in faded ink, was my mom's name. I froze. They weren't addressed to Grandma. They were from her. All of them. I don't know why my hands were shaking when I untied the ribbon. Maybe I thought I was about to find old birthday cards or some sweet notes about how proud she was of Mom. That would have made sense. But the second I started reading the first letter, my stomach dropped. It wasn't sweet at all. It was Cold. The words were sharp, like they'd been written by someone who wanted to wound. Things like, "You've ruined everything. I can't forgive you for what you did. You made your bed, now lie in it." My chest tightened as I read. This didn't sound like the grandma I knew. It didn't sound like the woman who baked pies for the church bake sale or comforted crying kids in her bakery. And then I reached the fourth letter. That's when I saw the words that would change how I saw my entire family forever. "If the truth ever comes out about what happened with Daniel, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Daniel." I didn't know anyone named Daniel. Not in my family, not in our town. But whoever he was clearly the center of something my grandma and my mom had kept buried for decades. And in that moment, I realized my perfect, sweet, kind grandma had been hiding a secret about my mom for over 30 years. And I had just stumbled right into it. I must have read that one sentence about Daniel 100 times before I even realized my mom had walked into the sewing room. She was carrying an empty cardboard box, her hair pulled back, eyes tired from both grief and exhaustion. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the bundle of letters in my hands. I froze. Part of me wanted to hide them, shove them back into the sewing box, and pretend I hadn't found anything. But I couldn't unsee the words. I couldn't unknow that name. "They're letters," I said carefully. "From Grandma. To you." Her whole face shifted, not in shock, but in this strange, tight way, like someone had just pulled a thread inside her that she'd been keeping knotted for years. "Where did you find them?" she asked, her voice flat. "In the bottom of her sewing box. Behind a false panel." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she set the box down and reached for the letters. "Give them to me." I hesitated. I read some of them. Her eyes snapped to mine, and I swear I saw something, fear, maybe, flash there before she looked away. "Those are private." "Mom," I said softly. "Who's Daniel?" She froze, her hands still halfway extended. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Finally, she blinked hard and turned away from me. "You shouldn't have read those." Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. The kind of edge that told me this conversation was over, at least for now. She left the room without taking the letters. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bundle in my lap, my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to chase her down, demand answers, but something in her tone had stopped me cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel. Who was he? Why would Grandma say my mom had ruined everything because of him? And why hide those letters in a secret compartment like they were dangerous? The next morning, while Mom was busy talking to the realtor about the house, I took the letters back to my apartment. I told myself it wasn't stealing, it was preserving something I needed to understand. Over the next few days, I read every single one. The earliest letter was dated 1988, when my mom would have been around 20. Grandma's handwriting was neat but slanted, as if she'd written the words in a rush. "I told you he wasn't the right kind of man. You never listen. You think love will solve everything, but it won't. It will ruin you. It already has." The next few letters grew colder. One accused Mom of being selfish. Another said she'd brought shame on the family. And in several, Grandma mentioned Daniel by name, always in the same bitter, clipped way. But none of them explained what actually happened. Until the one from 1992. "You've made your choice, and now you'll live with it. Don't come crying to me when he's gone. I warned you. I begged you to listen. But you were too stubborn. Too much like your father. And now, he's gone. You've lost him. And you've lost my respect. Gone. Not dead. I realized. Just gone." Something about the way she wrote that made my chest ache. It wasn't grief. It was finality. Like whatever happened with Daniel had ended in a way that couldn't be undone. The last letter, from 1994, was the cruelest. "You made sure he'll never be part of this family. That's on you. I will never forgive you for that." and I hope one day you'll understand what you've done. I put the letters down and stared at the ceiling. The woman who had been my safe place, my role model, had been capable of writing things that cut like knives. And they were all aimed at my mom. The weirdest part? Mom never once, in all my life, mentioned a man named Daniel. I decided I couldn't just let it go. If Mom wouldn't talk, maybe someone else would. The first person I thought of was Aunt Linda, Grandma's younger sister. She lived 2 towns over and had always been the fun aunt, the one who sent me care packages in college and slipped me $20 bills when Mom wasn't looking. I called her that afternoon and asked if I could come by. She didn't hesitate. Of course, honey. But is everything okay? Not really, I admitted. I found something. About Grandma. And Mom. And someone named Daniel. There was silence on the other end. Not the casual kind. This was heavy. Then Aunt Linda sighed. Come tomorrow. We'll talk. When I pulled up to her house the next day, she was already on the porch, rocking in her chair. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. Inside, she poured me iced tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table. I was afraid this would come up someday, she said, her voice low. Your grandma did a lot of good in her life. But she wasn't perfect. And when it came to your mom, she could be downright cruel. I felt my throat tighten. Because of Daniel? Aunt Linda nodded slowly. Yes, Daniel. She took a deep breath, like she was deciding how much to tell me. Your mom and Daniel were in love. Deeply. But he wasn't from here. He was older, had a bit of a wild past. Your grandma didn't approve. She thought he'd ruin your mom's life. That's it? I asked. She hated him because he was from out of town? Linda shook her head. It's more complicated than that. Daniel wasn't just from out of town. He had secrets. Ones your grandma thought would bring shame to the family if anyone found out. What kind of secrets? Linda's eyes softened. That's not mine to tell. But I will say this. Your grandma gave your mom an ultimatum. Leave Daniel or lose the family. My breath caught. And Mom chose him? For a while, Linda said. But something happened. Something bad. And Daniel disappeared from her life forever. After that, your grandma never let her forget it. I leaned back, my mind racing. None of this fit with the woman I knew. My grandma had built her whole life around kindness and community, so why tear her own daughter apart over a relationship? And more importantly, what could Daniel have done that made my grandma hide it for over 30 years? Aunt Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Be careful, sweetheart. Sometimes digging up the past doesn't just hurt. It changes the way you see everyone you love. I wanted to tell her it was too late for that. Because it had already started. That night, I couldn't get Aunt Linda's words out of my head. Be careful, sweetheart. Sometimes digging up the past doesn't just hurt. It changes the way you see everyone you love. It sounded like a warning, but also like a dare. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the letters, about Daniel, and about my mom, this quiet, steady woman who'd raised me almost entirely on her own, never dating, never even hinting that she'd once been in love. If Daniel had been such a huge part of her life, why erase him so completely? By morning, I decided I wasn't going to stop until I knew everything. The next day, I drove to the town library. It was the kind of place that still smelled like old books and furniture polish, where Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, had worked since before I was born. She knew everybody's family tree better than they did. When I asked her if she remembered a man named Daniel from the late 80s or early 90s, she tilted her head. Daniel? She tapped a finger against her chin. You mean Daniel Brooks? My pulse quickened. Maybe. Did he live here? For a while, she said. Moved into town around 87, worked at the auto shop on 3rd Street. Handsome fellow. Real charmer. But, well, there were rumors. What kind of rumors? I asked carefully. Mrs. Thompson gave me that look older people give when they know more than they should say. You know how it is in small towns. Folks talk. Some said he had trouble with the law before he came here. Others claimed he was married when he started seeing. She stopped abruptly. Seeing who? I pressed. Mrs. Thompson's lips pursed. Never mind. That's old history. Best to let it stay buried. But I knew who she meant. My mom. I thanked her and walked out, but my head was spinning. Trouble with the law? Married? None of that fit the picture I'd built in my head. If that was true, it meant my mom's relationship with him was even more complicated than Aunt Linda had admitted. I decided to check the archives. The library had stacks of old newspapers on microfilm, and after an hour of squinting at blurry headlines, I found his name. Local man arrested after altercation outside bar. The article was from 1989. Daniel Brooks, age 27, charged with assault after a fight in the parking lot of Murphy's Tavern. It said he'd been released the next morning, charges dropped. No mention of my mom, but the timing matched the letters. I kept scrolling. There wasn't much else, just a few mentions of him playing on the local softball team, and then nothing. No arrest records, no obituaries, no wedding announcements. By the mid-90s, it was like he disappeared. I left the library more confused than ever. If Daniel had been such a problem, why did Grandma seem more furious at my mom than at him? When I got home, Mom was in the kitchen unpacking groceries. I leaned against the counter, the letters burning a hole in my mind. Mom, I said, I went to the library today. She glanced at me but didn't stop arranging cans in the pantry. That's nice. I know about Daniel Brooks. Her hand froze on a can of green beans. Slowly, she turned to look at me. You've been digging, she said quietly. I had to, I told her. You've never told me anything about him. I found his name in Grandma's letters, and now I know he was. I hesitated. Important to you. Something flickered in her eyes, pain, maybe, or regret. It was a long time ago, but it mattered, I said. It mattered enough that Grandma hated him. Enough that she never forgave you. Mom closed her eyes and exhaled. You think you want the truth, but you don't. Yes, I do. My voice cracked. You've kept this part of your life hidden from me my whole life. Why? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she said, because some things don't need to be passed down. Some pain belongs to the person who lived it. That answer only made me angrier. You can't just erase people, Mom. If Daniel was such a mistake, why did you choose him over Grandma? What happened to him? Her jaw tightened. He's gone. That's all you need to know. But that wasn't enough. That night, I called Aunt Linda again. I need to know more, I said. If you don't tell me, I'll find someone who will. She sighed heavily. All right. But you didn't hear it from me. I could hear her shifting the phone to her other ear. Daniel wasn't married when he met your mom, not legally. But he had a kid. A little boy. He didn't tell her at first. When she found out, she was hurt, but she loved him anyway. Your grandma, though. She lost it. Said your mom was throwing her life away on a man with baggage. My stomach twisted. So she gave Mom an ultimatum. Yes. But your mom didn't listen. She moved in with him for a while. I think she thought she could handle being a stepmom. But then something happened. Something between him and your grandma. A fight. Words were said. And a week later, Daniel packed up and left town. No goodbye. No explanation. I gripped the phone tighter. You're saying he just left? Yes, Linda said. Your mom was devastated. She never dated again after that. Your grandma told everyone he was no good and forbade us from mentioning his name. My head was spinning. A child. A disappearance. A family-wide cover-up. After I hung up, I went back to the letters. I read them again, this time with the new information in mind. And I realized something. Grandma's anger wasn't just about Daniel. It was about control. She hadn't just been disappointed in my mom. She'd wanted to break her. But the more I thought about it, the less sense Daniel's disappearance made. People don't just vanish without leaving some kind of trail. And that's when I decided I was going to find him. I didn't tell Mom I was going to look for him. After our last conversation, I knew she'd try to stop me. Maybe she'd even get Aunt Linda to talk me out of it. But I couldn't let this go. Daniel Brooks had been the epicenter of an emotional earthquake in my family's past, and everyone had just decided to build over the wreckage. I wanted to dig down to the fault line. I started with the obvious, Google. Typing in Daniel Brooks Oregon Auto Shop brought up nothing useful. Just a few LinkedIn profiles that didn't match the age range, and some obituaries for people who were clearly too old or too young. Then I remembered the old town phone book archives were digitized online. I found him listed in 1988, 1989, and 1990, same address, same phone number, but by 1991, his name was gone. I called the number, just to see. It was disconnected. Next, I posted on a local Facebook group for my hometown asking if anyone remembered him. I got a few comments from older residents. Yeah, I remember Daniel. Worked on my car once. Nice guy, but there was always talk about him and that Carter girl. Didn't he leave after some big fight with that bakery lady? I heard he went down to California. Or maybe Texas. One comment caught my eye. Last I heard, he was in Sacramento. My brother used to know him. Try looking there. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. I searched Sacramento's public records and found a Daniel J. Brooks who'd registered a business license for a small garage in 1997. My heart started pounding. That would make him about the right age. The listing didn't have a phone number, just an address. It was enough. I told myself I was just going to drive down, see the place, and maybe ask around. But deep down, I knew I wanted more than that. I wanted to see him. When I got there 2 days later, the garage was still there, a squat, sun-bleached building with a hand-painted sign that said Brooks Auto Repair. A man in his late 50s was under the hood of an old pickup. Excuse me, I said, my voice trembling. Are you Daniel Brooks? He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Who's asking? My name's Hannah Carter. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then something flickered there, recognition. And maybe a little fear. You look like her, he said finally. My mom? He nodded slowly. Yeah. Claire. Hearing her name in his voice was like opening a window to a past I'd never known. I found letters. I blurted out. From my grandma. About you. I need to know what happened. He set the rag down and gestured toward a bench outside the garage. Sit. I sat. He took a long breath before speaking. Your mom was. She was everything. Sweet. Smart. Strong. I didn't deserve her. But I loved her. More than I'd ever loved anyone. Then why did you leave? I asked. He stared at the ground for a moment. Because your grandmother made it clear that if I stayed, I'd destroy her life. She told you that? Not in so many words. But she didn't have to. She threatened to cut her off completely. No support, no family, nothing. And she found out something I'd been keeping from your mom. I felt my stomach knot. The child, I said. Your son. He looked surprised. You know about him? I nodded. Aunt Linda told me. Daniel's shoulders sagged. Yeah. His name's Michael. I had him young. His mom and I split before I met Claire. I didn't tell her right away because I was afraid she'd walk away before giving me a chance. But when your grandma found out, she told Claire I'd been lying to her from the start. And maybe she was right. That's not a reason to just disappear, I said, my voice sharper than I meant. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. I didn't just disappear. I left because your mom told me to. I blinked. She told you to go? Daniel nodded. We had this huge fight. She said she couldn't choose between me and her family, And since her mom made her feel like I was a threat to everything she'd worked for, she asked me to leave before she changed her mind. My chest tightened. She's never said that. She's never even mentioned you. He gave a sad smile. That's because talking about me would mean talking about the hardest decision she ever made. And maybe she doesn't want you to see her as weak. We sat there in silence for a moment, the sound of a distant highway filling the air. I don't hate your grandmother, he said finally. She thought she was protecting Claire. But she didn't see that she was breaking her too. I didn't know what to say. I'd come here expecting to find a villain, someone I could blame for all the pain I'd uncovered. But instead, I found a man who still looked like he carried love and regret for my mom. Before I left, Daniel handed me a folded piece of paper. That's my number. If your mom ever wants to talk, she knows where to find me. I drove back home with my head spinning. When I walked into the house, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up and knew immediately. You found him. I didn't even try to deny it. He told me everything. About the baby. About you telling him to leave. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want you to know. Why? I asked. Why hide it? Because, she said, her voice breaking, I wanted you to believe I was strong. Not the kind of person who lets someone else decide her future. I sat across from her. You are strong, but you're also human. And I think I deserve to know the truth about my own family. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then you should know this too. Your grandmother wasn't just angry at me for loving him. She was angry because I was pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant. And when I lost the baby, Mom whispered, she said it was for the best. Like it was some kind of blessing. I never forgave her for that. The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Mom's eyes were fixed on the tabletop, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. I didn't know, I whispered. I didn't know you. I couldn't even finish the sentence. She finally looked up. It was early. We'd only been together a few months when I found out. I was scared, but Daniel, he was happy. Said we could make it work. Her voice cracked. But your grandma, she saw it as proof that he was dragging me down. That I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I swallowed hard. And when you lost the baby, she nodded. I was devastated. But she acted like it was a relief. I think that's when something in me broke. I couldn't fight both of them, Daniel wanting to stay, her wanting him gone. I told him to leave because I thought maybe it would stop the war between them. But it didn't. She never let me forget. Hearing it out loud made the letters in my drawer feel heavier than they already did. They weren't just cruel words. They were the ongoing echo of my mom's worst heartbreak. I saw him, I said quietly. Her head snapped up. You what? I went to Sacramento. He has a little garage there. He still thinks about you, Mom. He gave me his number. Said you could call him if you wanted. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, like she was trying to keep from crying. It's been 30 years, Hannah. Whatever we had, it's gone. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's just buried under all the pain Grandma left behind. Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. I could see the war in her eyes, the same war she'd been fighting since before I was born. Over the next week, things between us were tense but different. There was this fragile awareness in the air now, like we were both carrying an open box of glass we didn't want to drop. One night, while I was doing dishes, Mom walked into the kitchen holding a small, worn photo. She placed it on the counter between us. It was her, barely older than I was now, standing in front of a rust-red pickup truck. Her hair was longer, her smile wide. Next to her was Daniel, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking like they owned the world. That was the week before everything changed, she said softly. I kept it hidden because I thought if I didn't see it, I could forget. But I never really did. I dried my hands and looked at her. You should call him. She didn't answer. just stared at the photo for a long time before walking away. 2 days later, I came home from work to find her sitting on the couch, phone in her lap, tears streaking her cheeks. "I called," she said. I sat beside her, my heart pounding. "And we talked for 2 hours," she said, almost like she didn't believe it herself. "He told me about his son. He's grown now, has kids of his own. He asked about you, said he was sorry for everything, and that he never stopped thinking about me. Do you want to see him?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. I think. I think I need to make peace with the past before I can face it in person." I understood. The truth had taken 30 years to come to the surface. It didn't need to be resolved in 30 minutes. That weekend, we went back to Grandma's house one last time. The sewing box was still there, the secret compartment now empty. I held it in my hands, feeling the grooves worn smooth from decades of use. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked Mom. She looked at it for a long time before shaking her head. "No. I think you should." So I did. Not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because I wanted to remember that people are more complicated than the roles we give them. My grandma had been the sweetest woman in town to everyone else, but inside this house, she'd been someone else entirely. And my mom, who I'd always seen as unshakable, had carried heartbreak quietly for most of her life. The day we closed the door for the last time, I felt like I was saying goodbye to two versions of my family. The one I thought I had, and the one I finally knew the truth about. A month later, Mom told me she'd spoken to Daniel again. This time, she told him about me finding the letters, about how it had all come rushing back because of that hidden sewing box. "He said something I haven't been able to stop thinking about," she told me. "What?" "That your grandma probably thought she was protecting me. She just didn't realize she was breaking me at the same time." I didn't know if that was true, but I wanted to believe it. It was easier than believing she'd been cruel just to be cruel. Sometimes I catch Mom looking at that old photo again. I don't know if she'll ever see Daniel in person. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. But at least the silence is gone. At least the truth isn't buried anymore. As for me, I keep the sewing box on a shelf in my apartment. Every time I see it, I remember how fragile the stories we tell ourselves can be, and how quickly they can change once the missing pieces are found. Because no matter how sweet someone seems, no matter how perfect the image, there's always a chance that behind the curtain, there's a truth that's been waiting decades to come out. And once you see it, you can never unsee it.